Welcome to a special edition of the Christy Taylor Show. Hope you all are having a wonderful Thursday. And I am so excited to have our guest today in his busy press run. He's making a stop by the Christy Taylor Show here. I mean, you've been super busy today. I mean, you've been somewhere everywhere.
Yeah, we're trying to get the word out because it's important and our people need access to information. So, my dear sister, Christy Taylor, thank you for having me. As you said, I guess the press run wouldn't be right if I didn't stop by the Christy Taylor.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you. I feel very honored indeed. Well, of course, our guest, as you see, is Reverend Earle J. Fisher, Ph.D. Some call him Dr. Fisher. I mean, he is a all-around man. And for those who may be watching outside of the Memphis market, Reverend Fisher, can you just kind of give them a history of who you are in the context of our city? And then we're going to get up to what we are really going to be talking about, the election and the importance of voter registration and involvement and engagement.
Sure. Thanks again, Christy. I am Claudia's son, and today is my mother's birthday. So I'd be remiss if I didn't salute Claudia Fisher and her birthday. I am Denise's husband. I'm Jalen's dad. I'm the senior pastor of the Blackest Church of Memphis and Shelby County, Abyssinian Baptist Church in Whitehaven. I'm the founder of Up the Vote 901. That's a nonpartisan collaborative initiative. It's a voter empowerment organization. Our mission and vision is to help produce more power, information, and representation for more people and to increase voter turnout in Memphis and Shelby County in every election. So again, glad to be with you, sister. I guess that's what I am to the city.
That's what you are to the city. And of course, I had the first time I met you, well, casually, was that your involvement in the arts community is also noted. This was
Mm-hmm.
quite a few years ago. Chandra Kamaria, or Chandra
Mm-hmm.
Harkins, for those of us who know
Mm-hmm.
her, had you as a part of a conversation because you're a scholar as well. And you were
Mm-hmm.
talking about hip hop and the Black
Mm-hmm.
community and the church and this, the intersection of that, which of course empowers and impacts our community on so many levels. So I do want to say he's also deeply involved in the arts community, ladies and gentlemen.
I got love for the artists, man. They often point us into the direction by which we need to go. As a matter of fact, when I'm doing some of my voter empowerment stuff and voter education stuff, I point to a YouTube video of a hip hop artist. His name is Yellow Payne, and he has a video called "My Vote Don't Count." He runs through like some of the particulars that we try to share too about the relationship between the federal government, the state government, the local government, elections, turnout, all of those things. So yeah, I mean, the artists are invaluable insofar as the way that they help us see things that we tend to not see. And sometimes, and I talked about this earlier on WLOK, sometimes some artists kind of mislead us too. I know there's been a lot of
Mhm.
conversation about a particular hip hop artist
Mhm.
specifically, and I just say, I don't think we should always look to our artists and entertainers for our political insight or for spiritual or religious insight. I think
Right.
in the areas in which they are reflecting to us what's happening in the world that we're living in. That's fantastic and that's good and that's informative. But there are limits to everybody's knowledge, power, and time. So there are
Right.
some areas that I am, well versed in, and some not so much. So just as much as I wouldn't want to try to tell Kanye West how to maneuver 808, I don't think he should be trying to tell people how to vote.
Ooh, I didn't know if you were going to say him by Ye or Kanye, but definitely. But this is so important, and I want to kind of put this in the context of, yes, we're talking about nationally the midterm elections, the state of Tennessee, of course Shelby County, Memphis. We're just bringing it down, but if we can get into people's houses right now, and someone might be watching this, on the go, at home, at work, what is your concern about Memphians in particular in this election cycle?
One, that we've been lulled to sleep because it's not a presidential election. And generally, the presidential elections are when we yield the most turnout. And that's
Mhm.
because most people are in tuned and engaged with what's happening. And you see these high profile personalities in times past, whether it be Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or George Bush or Hillary Clinton and now Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Well, we also are probably more directly impacted by who the governor of Tennessee is or
Yes.
who some of the elected officials are, not just at the state level, but at the county level, or who some of these judges are. And so these are important elections as well because we're deciding who's going to represent us at the state house. If you are paying attention in the state of Tennessee, we are in the midst of, in essence, what's a white nationalist takeover at the state level. So Memphis does not bode well with legislators who are much more concerned with maintaining white political power than they are making sure that Memphians and people in Shelby County get a fair slice of the pie in terms of state resources that generally come from the federal government. And this impacts things like health care. This impacts things like voter rights and access. This impacts things like crime and public safety in terms of funding. So I think it's important for us to pay attention, which is why we're doing our Voter and Power Symposium this Saturday at Abyssinian Baptist Church at 11 o'clock. Up to Vote 901 does several voter empowerment symposiums, because I know you said earlier, Christy, about voter registration, but I've said a million times, Memphis and Shelby County, we do not have a voter registration problem. We got a voter education problem that leads to a voter engagement problem that leads to a voter turnout problem. Our people don't feel adequately informed, so they don't feel confident about being engaged enough to march to the ballot box. So we take issues that are important to people, and in this particular iteration of our Voter Empowerment Symposium, we're doing criminal justice reform processes. People have talked a lot over the last several years about criminal justice reform with high-profile police shootings, police-involved shootings, and also in Memphis and Shelby County recently, some very high-profile murders and some heinous activity, not just from young people or juveniles in that regard, but all of us are impacted by this in one way or the other. So we're bringing people from the district attorney's office. We bring in scholars and people who deal with people who are involved in the criminal justice system on the ground. And we are asking the people of the city of Memphis to come out and engage in this necessary conversation.
Now, Reverend Fisher, I'm just thinking as we're going into this midterm election, we just came from, off of I'll say a summertime, August, and there were quite a few judges on the ballot. Of course, this was a historic win in the city and regarding some of these issues. Can you kind of backtrack to, from your perspective, what you noted from that election and what you can see a foreboding for November?
I'm glad you brought that up. It gives me a chance to share something here that I didn't get a chance to share elsewhere. One of the reasons turnout is low currently. So we are trailing significantly the turnout from 2018, but we're ahead by a little bit of the turnout from 2014. Part of the reason is we have voter fatigue. We have election fatigue. So this is the third election this year. We had the primary elections in April. We had what you just referenced in August, which were the state and federal primaries, but the Shelby County general election was in August. Now what we have are what are called the midterm elections, which are the state and federal general elections. So in the primary election, you basically choose which candidate is going to represent which party in the general election.
Correct.
And it was important for us as Up to Vote 901, being the organization that has revived and resurrected the People's Convention, to do the People's primary election or the People's primary People's Convention in April, because most of the time at the county level, because Shelby County is heavily Democratic in terms of voter participation, whoever wins from the primary in the Democratic Party tends to win in the general election. So whereby our city elections, our municipal elections are currently nonpartisan. So you don't even have a primary, which is why we're running the risk. And I'll come back and talk about this in the next few months. We're running the risk leaning into 2023 of several democratically leaning and Black candidates running for mayor, and then one white candidate sneaking in. And that was the case in 2015. So people are apathetic in one sense, because they're like, oh, we got another election again. Yeah, and this one is about your state legislators, your state representatives, your state senator, your federal legislators, your congresspersons, and the governor. So there are judgeships that are on the seat now. Many of them were already filled back in August at the county level, and those are some of the more impactful ones. But of course, depending upon the criminal charge, sometimes it is the defendant against Shelby County. Correct. But sometimes it's the defendant against the United States of America or defendant against Tennessee. So when you're picking federal judges, you're picking people who have jurisdiction over certain federal offices, whereby in August, we were picking those who had jurisdiction over county offices. All of these are important. All of these are impactful. But I know it's complicated and convoluted, which is why we ask people to show up to these voter empowerment symposiums where we can talk in more detail about some of these particulars.
Now, Reverend Fisher, you spoke about Up the Vote 901 helping to resurrect the People's Convention. And over the past weekend, I participated in the Indie Memphis Film Festival. And one of the screenings was the documentary about United Front, the People's Convention that created a consensus on who was elected eventually, Dr. Willie Harrington as the first African American mayor. And over these past 30 years, we have definitely splintered again. And we are finding, as you say, voters fatigue and a lot of apathy, and as you say, there are a lot of people who are very much registered to vote and they are not engaged. With the fact that I'll say like this, we're in hindsight celebrating our past histories, but yet we are on the verge of a 2023 election where we have multiple mayor, candidates.
Mayoral candidates.
Where are we in the conversation while we're celebrating? We were united, 30 years ago, and yet we're very much, across the board, every man for himself. Or is that the fact that we just need more choices?
No, I don't think it's about us having more choices necessarily. I think it's connected to the current election and other elections in this way. There have been constant concerted efforts to diminish the power of the Black vote, especially in majority Black cities. Okay. And so what happened in 1991 was people wanted to get ahead of a split Black vote. And they knew that if you ran several of the similarly situated candidates, several Black candidates, and then one white candidate, you would split the Black vote, even though Memphis and Shelby County is a majority Black county and a majority Black city. Okay. So they were trying to get ahead of that. I think that's important now because what you see happening in Nashville is a continuation of an attempt to diminish Black political power, which is why Memphis and Shelby County is a blue dot in a majority red state and is often taught or treated as like the bastard child.
Yeah.
Even though we tend to generate a lot of the revenue
for the
that
whole
takes
state.
place in the state, right? We don't get equitable amount of resources from the state because the state legislators who have been elected to office from across the state don't share the same sentiment of valuing a Black vote. They only want a Black vote where it can be manipulated such that they can leverage it to maintain white political power. This is the same thing that happens in Memphis and Shelby County. It's the same thing that happens, especially when you have municipal elections that are not partisan, because now it's easier to get a diluted Black vote if you end up with 5 or 6 Black candidates and then one white candidate. This was the case in 2015 when Mayor Strickland was elected. He was elected, he won 41% of the vote, but A.C. Warden had 27% of the vote. Harold Collins had 20% of the vote. That's 47% right there. And Mike Williams had 15% of the vote. Wow. So the vast majority of the people who voted didn't vote for Strickland, but he ended up winning because of the split Black vote. I'm concerned, others are concerned, that a similar situation might arise in 2023. We're trying to get ahead of that. But at the same time, we have this important election that is before us right now. Early voting is underway right now.
Yes.
And things are going to be decided that will impact our access to resources and opportunities at the state level and at the federal level. And we can't afford to fall asleep at the wheel.
Okay, so with that being said, bringing it back to early voting now, up through the November election, midterm election of 2022, ladies and gentlemen. And during early voting, you can vote at any location. Let's talk about that, about the access to early voting.
Yeah, so if we're talking again about the diminishing of Black votes, one of the tactics that tend to be utilized is making it more difficult for people to find access to the ballot box. So in some states and in some counties, you can only vote on election day, and that's difficult. So people want to be able to have a wider variety and range of voting opportunities. So one of the things Up to Vote 901 and other organizations have done is advocate to expand early voting, because during early voting, you can vote at any open precinct. But on election day, you have to vote at the precinct that you have been assigned to. The challenge with that in Shelby County is oftentimes people have their precinct reassigned to them through the election commission and they haven't been notified. The election commission will say, well, we tried to mail it to you or something like that. Number one, they wait until the 11th hour before they send any correspondence out. And number two, they don't tend to be able to track when people change addresses. So if I just move 2 doors over, my mail is going to come. That's going to notify me that my polling precinct has been changed, but it's not going to come to the address that I'm currently at. So I'll go stand in line on election day because I waited till the last minute, right? And maybe I just have a ritual about showing up on election day. So if there's a long line and I end up standing in line for 3 hours, by the time I get up to the polling site and I stand there and give them my information, they look at my driver's license, they pull my information up and say, I'm sorry, you can't vote here. You got to go to this other site. And for some, the other site is on the other side of town.
Yeah.
So now you waited in line for several hours. You get to the front. You can't vote there. They either give you a provisional ballot, which may or may not be counted, or they send you to the other part of town, which is much more of an inconvenience. So people end up saying, I'll just sit this one out. And that's if they are inspired and informed enough to feel like they're going to vote anyway. So in order to compromise, in order to offset those challenges, we're encouraging people to vote early. Go to the nearest polling precinct. They will accept you as long as you have a valid form of identification. And if something just so happens to happen then, at least you got another day to go back and get it correct.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up about the importance of early voting, and particularly if there are any changes in your life, any changes at all, last name, all like that. One election I actually worked a couple years ago, and I found that was a challenge when people are like, oh, I just got married, or, or like I said, or I relocated. And I want to encourage you, yes, please early vote. Please early vote. Make it a ritual that the early voting is when you get together and can go to any precinct. But I want to kind of dive into something else about being an informed voter. I must say that when I did the early voting in August for the August election, it was so many people that I was trying to find the information to research the candidates. And, it's so all over the place, depending upon party, depending upon district, depending upon, topics. And I felt I was informed, but when I got to the ballot, there were still some names. I'm like, wait a minute, where these people come from? and because I'm very passionate about your topic this year about criminal justice and criminal justice reform. So when it comes to, I understand particularly for a city like Memphis, you are impacted by the judges. You are impacted by the local officials. If anything, if you don't vote for nothing else, vote for your local that is immediately going to impact you. But when I did not even know some of the judges and what they were representing, I felt really blindsided. And so does Up the Vote 901 provide us a platform where we can research, regardless of party, regardless of district, information about the candidates?
Yeah, although we have not independently published a voter guide, what we do is tend to direct people to places where they can find the voter guides. And for those who don't know, like for instance, the Memphis Public Library, just about every election publishes a nonpartisan voter guide. So everybody who is supposed to be on the ballot and the positions that they are running for are generally published on the Memphis Public Library website. You can go to that website, you can click links, and if people have easily accessible websites or pages and things of that nature, then it's generally found through a website like that. So we've shared that one. We've shared voter guides that were published through the Equity Alliance, housed out of Nashville, but we've partnered with them doing voter empowerment work across the state. So we tend to do it that way. We haven't, again, published one independently. But let me tell you why I feel like what you're describing is so valuably important. Number one, because all of us can fall a victim to not having adequate information and feeling overwhelmed at the ballot box. I felt that way in August. That was the longest ballot ever in history.
Yes.
Right. So all of these niggas, and I call myself, having my all of that. And then I'm still looking because the way that they even organized the ballot was kind of complicated. So you have to have a certain level of perseverance. You got to have some bandwidth. You got to have some chutzpah, according to the Jewish folks, right? In order to be able to stand there and stick it out and be diligent to make sure that you cast your vote in a way that you can feel confident about. But to your point about criminal justice reform and why people should come Saturday, and why this election is important. Recently, two things happened at the state level that impacted things at the local level. Number one, residency requirements for law enforcement officers. The city of Memphis said, if you are going to work in the city of Memphis Police
Mhm.
Department, you need to work in the city. I mean, you need to live in the city.
Right, right.
Well, what, and I think they expanded it to the county. Well, Mayor Strickland went to Nashville and lobbied and had them pass legislation that overrides the residency requirements. Now I can live in Kentucky and drive into Memphis, police your neighborhood, and then drive back out and go back home to Kentucky.
What?
The other thing that's important as we talk about a rise in violent crime is the law that was passed about open carry. That
Yes.
was passed at the state level.
That's
So the state
correct.
legislator said, I don't care if your gun is registered or not. If you walk down the street, you can show your gun. And the expectation is supposed to be we give you the benefit of the doubt and say that the gun is legal, it's registered, and you have the right to carry. Well, what we all know is law enforcement don't trust black folk like that. So white folk can walk down the street with their gun out and don't have to really worry about police officers or anybody for that matter kind of looking at them weird and strange as if they're about to commit a violent act or as if they don't have the right to carry that gun. That's
Right.
not the same benefit of the doubt that are given to black bodies in public. But these are
Mhm.
two things that happen at the state level because state legislators went to the Capitol in Nashville and passed these laws. And in one instance, a local executive or administrator, the mayor, went and lobbied in Nashville to have something passed that would override what happened locally. So every election is important. And I know we kind of say this, until we're blue in the face. And I know, again, this is the third election this year, but the ones that we choose to sit out might be the ones that end up biting us in the butt.
Okay, to that point, of course, we know we had a horrific experience that traumatized the whole city when that young man was on that rampage for the reasons that he was. So there becomes a conservative leaning in the black community that tends to start leaning very blue and
Mm-hmm.
not very much to well, we're already a blue dot in the red state, but be
Yeah.
leaning toward very conservative views about how are policed.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we in that conversation as Memphis has matured? We have a black middle class, and they are, I mean, by the definition of black middle class,
Mm-hmm.
and they now feel they're clutching pearls too.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's your thought when you're having this conversation this weekend about criminal justice reform? Because some people are now just as conservative in their views on how policing
Mm-hmm.
is done, whether it's juvenile and above.
So this is where Saturday we'll really lean into two of the scholars that'll be present on the panel, and that's Dr. Andre Johnson and Dr. Daphne McFerrin. Andre Johnson is a communications professor at the University of Memphis. Dr. McFerrin is the executive director of the Benjamin L. Hooks Center for Social Justice there. So Dr. Johnson has done research on police reform and that he can share. He's interviewed several people insofar as sharing the sentiment of what you articulated about Memphis, in essence, being much more conservative than people would give us credit for. We assume that because it's a major metropolitan city, that the politics in there are much more liberal or progressive than they actually are. I remember several years ago, after I think it was the 2019 election, and one of the local media outlets had a panel discussion with some journalists, and Dr. Karanja Ajanaku of the Tri-State Defender said Memphis is moderate at best, but definitely not, our political leanings are not progressive or liberal. And I
Mhm.
think that's true of a lot
That's
of
true.
majority black cities in ways that we don't necessarily understand because black
Mhm.
folks are generally bearing the brunt and the burden of many of the policies that are passed if they are not managed or regulated properly.
Mhm.
Like the one I
Mhm.
just mentioned in terms of like the concealed carry or the open carry law. So we'll get Dr. Johnson to share some of his insights on that particular sentiment and what it means. Dr. McFerrin can talk about how criminal, just like what you said, Christy, that criminal justice reform is something that you're passionate about, she could talk about how criminal justice reform policies impact how people turn out to vote. And so people want to feel like those things that they are passionate about and those issues that they want to see front and center are adequately represented by the people who are ultimately running for office. That's not always the case, and we could talk about why. So I'm hoping I'm getting at your question and honoring that there is a very conservative leaning within the Black community in Memphis and Shelby County. And I would argue some of that is because we are unfamiliar with the nuts and bolts data. So some of what will be shared Saturday is data. So do tough on crime or zero tolerance policies actually end up in deterring crime?
That's the question.
But the concrete answer is no. Okay. For real. Like, does a increase in law enforcement officers by the numbers equate to a decrease in crime? The concrete answer is no. Like basic data stuff. But our psychology is shaped by the things we see in media looped over and over again, and the things we hear articulated out of the mouths of people who are either running for office or in office over and over again. So here's one way I'll lay it out for you, Christy, then I'll digress. Nashville has a larger population than Memphis. Nashville has larger square mileage than Memphis. Nashville has fewer police officers than Memphis, and Nashville has lower crime than Memphis. If crime was directly correlated to the number of police officers in a particular landmass, Nashville would have higher crime numbers. They don't. Why? Because they don't have the poverty numbers that Memphis has.
I was about to say they're gonna, because see, here you go. There you go. See, most people say, but they ain't got as many Black people. But your point is, no, they don't have as much poverty.
Yeah. Because you can go to extremely affluent. This is why Whitehaven is a wonderful place to do some activism, some organizing, some voter empowerment work, and some research. If you go to some of the go to Lionsgate. For those who don't know where Lionsgate is, it's on Elvis Presley, not too far from the Walmart, like Elvis Presley and Holmes. And this is one of the more affluent neighborhoods in the entire city, but it's a predominantly Black neighborhood. You don't find a lot of crime there because you don't find poverty in Lionsgate. Okay. So what you find there are people who have solid and stable families, solid and stable careers, solid and stable finances. But if you drive up the street to a place like Pepper Tree or New Horizons or some of these other, apartment complexes, I almost said projects, but that would be like Foot Homes and Claiborne Homes and all of them. But the apartment complexes where you see people much more disproportionately impoverished, then you see higher instances of crime. The same would be true in Nashville or anywhere else you go. The studies show that there are direct correlations between crime and poverty. So now we need to ask, who are we electing to office that keeps proposing legislation or advancing legislation that does not seem to take into account these concrete data points? What are they after? Who do they represent? And how do we hold them accountable?
I know we can't talk about it here. That's why Saturday, give them the details on Up the Vote 901 for this Saturday.
Yeah, please meet us at Abyssinian Baptist Church in Whitehaven. It's 3890 Mill Branch, 38116 at 11 o'clock. We are asking people to register using a Google form link that we've been sharing around. I'll send it to you, Christy, if you hadn't gotten it already. But even if you need to come and register on site, we just want y'all to be there and be a part of this conversation. It starts promptly at 11 o'clock. We will be done by 1 o'clock. So please don't try to wait until 12 o'clock and think you're going to come in and then get us to review everything we talked about the hour before you showed up, because now you got some novel and profound insight that you need to share, because these scholars who've been doing work and research, and our dear brother who is actively engaged in community work, Bertrand B.J. Williams, most of y'all would know him as Woody from P Valley. He's going to be there talking too. So don't try to come late and then try to educate everybody on stuff that we've already talked about in research. Show up at 11 o'clock, 3890 Mill Branch, 38116 Abyssinian Baptist Church for the Up the Vote 901 Voter Empowerment Symposium, where we're discussing criminal justice reform processes.
All right. Now I know we got to go, but I just want to throw this at you because on this ballot as well, for those who don't know, that we are as a state contending with two other issues, which include slavery, along Tennessee, along some other.
That's Amendment 3.
Yeah, Amendment 3. And there was another one that was a hot button that had to do with some long-term institutionalized racism that is across the state. So make sure you all do your research.
Very simply, here's my recommendation. We've been sending it out unequivocally and unapologetically. Vote no on Amendment 1. That's the right to work stuff. Even though it seems like it's for employees, it's not. It's for corporations. It's not about what the right wing is saying. It's about vote no on Amendment 1. Vote yes on Amendment 2, 3, and 4.
Okay, then. Well, he's giving you those answers. That was quick and to the point. Then come on Saturday and participate at 11 a.m., not 11:45, 12:15, but 11 a.m. and be a part of the full 2-hour discussion. It is Up the Vote 901. Reverend Earle J. Fisher, Ph.D., Dr. Fisher. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. Y'all can catch us at Up the Vote 901 on Facebook or Up the Vote 901 on Instagram. Email us at upthevote901@gmail.com or go to upthevote901.com to our website. Thanks, Sister Christy. Love you much.
Much love to you.